Let's talk about trans women using women's restrooms.
So I gotta be honest, this will always be one of the topics that seems the most brain dead to me. So I'm a transgender woman who has been using the women's restroom for so long that I actually don't really remember the last time I used a men's restroom. I'm trying to think of it right now. Um, Maybe college, maybe like my first year of college, my second year of college, maybe. But it's been a while since I've been in college. It's been a while. It's been a while since I've been in college. We're not gonna do the math. Let's put it this way. I graduated when people were wearing headbands around their head for no reason. And like the women's restroom, using the women's restroom is quite literally one of the least controversial things I do. I mean, it's crazy to me that so many people take issue with transgender people using the restroom because it's something that trans people have been doing before you discovered what a trans person was. Before our society was as aware of transgender people as they are now, transgender people were always using the restroom, right? They were always using the restroom that matched their gender. Now, obviously, in my situation, a big reason why I've been able to do that is because I pass, right? Whatever the fuck that means to certain people, right? So for me, using the women's restroom is a completely uncontroversial affair. If the person who made this video tried to use the women's restroom, obviously within certain contexts, that would probably be an issue. And at the heart of this is that transgender people should not be at all in public. And I feel that way because whenever we have this conversation, everyone always tries to make one or two types of concessions. You say, trans women need to use the men's restroom because they're men and they were born men and da 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 yada yada, right? Um, or you say transgender people need to use the special bathroom for transgender people, or a single stall unisex bathroom. Now, if you've ever seen the South Park episode about this topic, when Cartman starts using the single stall restroom, it's kind of like a luxury experience. So he's low key like, I'm gonna keep using this rest. That's kind of my mentality, honestly. Like I even in situations where I know, I mean, again, and I want to make this clear. I use the women's restroom this in the same way I walk down the street, in the same way that I open a door. It is just what I do, right? But in situations where I can choose to have the luxury experience, I will choose to have the luxury experience. However, that being said, people aren't going to make concessions like that. They aren't going to make, single stall restrooms that are for everyone available everywhere. Most places are going to have a men's restroom and a women's restroom. And in most of those contexts, because it is so binarily gendered, there's an entire group of people who are not going to be able to use the restroom without stress, without getting attention on them. So really what this is trying to discourage people from being outside of their home long enough to where they would naturally have to use the restroom. Shitting and pissing is a thing that you can't control. And if you're in a situation where you can't use the public restroom in public, or you have to rely on trying to find, the single stall restroom or the restroom that's empty enough for you to use it without stress or struggle, right? You're just going to stay inside. You're just going to stay inside. And I try to point this out whenever we talk about this because people try to have all these other conversations. Oh my god, I just don't want men in the women's restroom. It makes me uncomfortable. Da 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 da. I'm unsafe. Da 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 da. And you know what? I hear where you're coming from with that, but the ultimate conclusion of this is that there is a certain class of people who are no longer going to be able to be outside in public because they can't use public restrooms. And I get so tired of this conversation because when a cis person goes to the restroom, there's not this intense conversation they're having with themselves about whether or not relieving themselves is in some way a violative act, right? But when you're a trans person, you can feel like that. You can feel like this thing in my body that I can't control is something that is political, right? And that's what makes me so crazy. Y'all politicize the shits and piss of trans people because you are so upset with the idea that trans people exist in public next to you and you have to interact with them. At the core of so much of this is just this idea that we should not ever be in public, ever have concessions, ever be considered. And you know what's funny to me about this boy? What's funny to me about this boy, a lot of these homosexuals don't understand that what you're doing is gender nonconforming too. In a cis hetero patriarchal society, the idea that men can be in relationships, relationships with men is gender non-conforming to a lot of people. Now, obviously, you're gonna have some conservatives who say, you're one of the good ones or whatever, as long as you don't make too much noise or whatever. But that's always pregnant in what they say. Eventually, the goal of these people is to get you to take the nails off, drop the black scent, marry a woman, and have children with her. That's the goal of it all, and that's the other layer of this, right? Here you have this homosexual man flicking his fingers around, getting his nails in our face, right? And he's trying to essentially encourage either isolation outside of, the public, right? Trans people to be isolated, or assimilation, right? He's encouraging assimilation. And because that's really what this is, right? So how is the trans person in the women's restroom being called out? Well, because she just didn't do enough. She just wasn't feminine enough. She wasn't, and I feel that way. Why? Because I've been using the women's restroom without issue for most of my fucking life at this goddamn point, right? Like, it's such a non-issue, but it's a non-issue because I pass and because I look a certain way. And if I didn't look a certain way, well, I would probably have more issues, right? And the thing about it is, not everyone is going to be able to assimilate. Not everyone wants to assimilate, and we shouldn't have to think about assimilation when we're trying to go to the bathroom. Shitting and pissing is non-binary, baby. It happens to all of us. And so this idea that we all need to put ourselves together a certain way in order to use the public restroom, or we need to be wary of where we go to the bathroom because it's political depending on where we go. It's crazy. And what annoys me about this again, is that a man who's going to enter into the women's restroom in order to assault a woman does not need to claim to be a woman. Men have never needed to claim to be women in order to assault women. That has literally never been the case. In fact, these types of men very rarely are going to want to have anything to do with being a woman, anything to do with being associated with being a woman, anything to do with being seen as feminine, because part of what they're doing is their male fucking entitlement that very much requires that they are men and identify as such. If a man goes into the women's restroom, cross-dresses as a woman, and assaults a woman, guess what? That's a person who assaulted a woman in the restroom, regardless of what their gender may be. And guess what? Women do assault women in the women's restroom as well. I have been personally assaulted on the women's restroom by women. So it's not like this thing where, I get how people get there. As a person who has a lot of trauma around men, I get it. But like, these are false dichotomies, and really it's just about removing trans people from public space. If you tell a person they have no right or ability to go to the restroom in public, that effectively removes them from public space. And I want for us to not lose sight of this, because ultimately that is what they're trying to do with all of this shit. They're trying to remove transgender people from public space. And if you fall for conversations like this, you'll let them.